People think revenge is a screaming match in a driveway or pouring red wine over a white wedding dress. They're wrong. True revenge is entirely silent. It's smiling at your sister's engagement party while knowing you just bought the bank that holds the mortgage on her dream house. My name is Christina. For the first 18 years of my life, my name might as well have been Stella's sister. Stella and I are fraternal twins, born exactly 11 minutes apart in the quiet, affluent suburb of Chicago. But from the moment we could walk, it was abundantly clear that those 11 minutes gave Stella a lifetime pass to be the star of the family, while I was cast as the stagehand. My parents, Richard and Brenda Harrison, weren't monsters. They didn't lock me in a cupboard under the stairs. Their cruelty was far more insidious. It was the cruelty of total blinding favoritism. Stella was, objectively, breathtaking. She had my mother's striking high cheekbones, cascading honey blonde hair, and a natural charisma that drew people in like moths to a flame. I was the smart one, the brunette with the glasses, the slightly crooked teeth, and a quiet demeanor that my mother constantly referred to as so painfully introverted. A say, household love was a currency, and Stella held the monopoly. When we turned 16, my father proudly rode a bright red BMW into the driveway. It had a massive silver bow on the roof. I remember standing on the porch, my heart hammering with excitement, thinking it was a shared gift. "Happy birthday, Stella Bear," my dad boomed, tossing her the keys. I looked at my mother, waiting for the punchline. "And what about Christina?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother sighed, the kind of sigh reserved for dealing with an unreasonable toddler. "Christina, be practical. Stella has cheer practice, student council, and a very active social life. You barely leave your room. You can take the bus, or I'm sure Stella will give you a ride if you pay for gas." That was the dynamic. Stella got the world, I got the scraps. But the turning point, the moment the soft, hurt girl inside me died, and a very different woman took her place, happened when I was 17. And it happened because of Noah Gallagher. Noah was the new boy in our junior year. He wasn't a stereotypical jock. He had messy brown hair, a quiet laugh, and a struggling grade in AP European history. I was assigned to tutor him. For 3 months we sat at my kitchen table every Tuesday and Thursday. We bonded over our mutual love for obscure indie bands, our shared anxiety about college, and a dry sense of humor that perfectly matched my own. For the first time in my life, a boy looked at me and actually saw me. He didn't ask about my sister. He didn't glance at the doorway, hoping she'd walk past. One rainy afternoon, as we were packing up our textbooks, Noah's hand brushed against mine. He didn't pull away. He looked at me, his eyes soft, and asked if I wanted to go to a concert with him that weekend. Just the two of us. My heart soared. I said yes. I made the fatal mistake of telling Stella. I was giddy, painting my nails in our shared bathroom when I let it slip. Stella paused, her mascara wand hovering in the air. "Noah Gallagher? The guy you tutor?" "Christina, he's actually kind of cute. Are you sure it's a date? Like a real date?" "Yes, Stella, it's a real date," I snapped, defensive immediately. She just smiled. A slow, terrifyingly sweet smile. "Well, have fun." The next day at school, I was walking to my locker when I saw them. Stella had cornered Noah by the water fountain. She was twirling a strand of her blonde hair, laughing at something he said, leaning in so close her perfume was practically suffocating him. I watched as she touched his arm, her eyes wide and validating. Noah looked dazed, like he'd been hit by a truck. That night I received a text from Noah. "Hey, Christina, I'm really sorry, but I can't make the concert this weekend. Something came up." An hour later, Stella walked into my room, tossing her designer bag onto my bed. "Hey, do you mind if I borrow your black leather jacket? Noah is taking me to that concert on Saturday and I have nothing to wear." She knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't even like the band. She didn't even like Noah. She just wanted him because he was the one thing in my life that was mine. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I calmly stood up, walked to my closet, and handed her the jacket. "Have a great time," I said. My parents, of course, thought it was adorable. "Oh, young love," my mother cooed at the dinner table. "Christina, it's so sweet of you to let your sister have this one. You're always so focused on your books anyway." That night, lying in the dark, listening to Stella giggling on the phone with Noah in the next room, something inside me crystallized. Ice replaced the blood in my veins. Crying was useless. Confronting them was useless. Playing the victim would only feed Stella's ego and my parents' narrative. I realized that if I wanted to win, I couldn't play their game. Stella traded on beauty, charm, and our parents' bank account. It was a fragile economy, entirely dependent on other people. I decided right then and there that I was going to build an empire of my own, an impenetrable fortress of money, power, and success. And I was going to do it completely in the dark. My revenge wouldn't be dramatic. It would be an absolute, undeniable victory at life. The day the college acceptance letters arrived perfectly encapsulated the Harrison family dynamic. Stella got into USC. It was a respectable school, but let's be honest, she chose it for the palm trees, the parties, and the proximity to Los Angeles influences. My parents wept tears of joy. My father immediately wrote a check for the exorbitant out-of-state tuition, while my mother began planning a massive graduation party to celebrate her golden child. I, on the other hand, was accepted into the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, one of the top undergraduate business programs in the world. When I showed my parents the letter, my father adjusted his reading glasses, skimmed it, and frowned. "Pennsylvania? Christina, that's incredibly expensive. And it's so far away. We've just committed a massive amount of our savings to Stella's tuition at USC. We can't possibly afford this." "I got a partial scholarship, Dad," I explained, keeping my voice steady, "and I'll take out student loans for the rest." "I'm not asking for your money." "Well, that's a tremendous amount of debt for a young girl," my mother chimed in, frowning. "Are you sure you wouldn't be happier at the community college here for 2 years? You could live at home. It would be so much less stressful for you." They didn't want me to succeed if it meant inconveniencing them, or worse, outshining Stella. I smiled, a tight, practiced expression. "No, I'm going to Penn." Ugh. The next 4 years were a study in extreme contrast. If you looked at Stella's Instagram, you would think life was a perpetual vacation. There were photos of her on yachts in Cabo, attending Coachella in designer bohemian wear, and posing with a rotating cast of wealthy, handsome fraternity boys. My parents subsidized her entire lifestyle, dipping into their retirement fund so their darling girl wouldn't have to experience financial stress. My reality was a brutal, relentless grind. I slept 4 hours a night. I took a full course load of advanced finance and economics classes. I worked 20 hours a week as a barista to afford groceries, and another 15 hours doing late-night data entry for a local accounting firm to keep my loan debt from suffocating me entirely. I didn't go to parties. I didn't date. I wore thrifted clothes and ate ramen noodles until the smell of them made me nauseous. But I was learning. I was absorbing everything about wealth accumulation, market trends, and corporate strategy like a sponge. During my junior, I landed an internship at Sterling and Hayes, a ruthless top-tier investment banking firm in New York. The managing partner, Arthur Sterling, was a notorious shark. He chewed up Ivy League interns and spat them out before lunch. But Arthur recognized something in me. He saw the hunger. He saw the cold, calculated anger that I had repurposed into an engine for work. "You don't care about making friends here, do you, Harrison?" he asked me late one Friday night as I handed him a flawless 60-page financial model I'd built from scratch. "No, sir," I replied. "I care about making money." He smirked. He smirked. "Good. Friends are a liability. Capital is security." By the time I graduated, I didn't just have a degree. I had a guaranteed position at Sterling and Hayes with a starting salary and signing bonus that dwarfed what my father made in a decade. I told my family none of this. When I flew back to Chicago for Stella's engagement party 2 years after graduation, I was a 24-year-old vice president at an investment bank, managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. My net worth had quietly crossed the $2 million mark, heavily invested in high-yield assets and quiet real estate acquisitions. Stella, meanwhile, had managed to secure her ultimate prize, Preston Caldwell. Preston was the heir to a Midwestern logistics empire. He was handsome in a weak-chinned, country club sort of way, and he wore pastel sweaters tied around his shoulders. The engagement party was held at a sprawling country estate, funded entirely by my parents, who were practically vibrating with pride at their daughter marrying into serious money. I arrived in a simple, off-the-rack navy dress. I drove a rental sedan. I played the part of the boring, struggling younger sister to absolute perfection. "Christina!" Stella shrieked, enveloping me in a cloud of expensive perfume. She held up her left hand, blinding me with a diamond the size of a marble. "Isn't it gorgeous? Preston designed it himself. He said I deserve nothing but the best." "It's beautiful, Stella." "Congratulations," I said, my voice perfectly pleasant. My mother bustled over, handing me a glass of cheap champagne while reserving the Dom Perignon for the Caldwells. "Christina, darling, I'm so glad you could take time away from your little spreadsheet job in New York. We were worried you wouldn't be able to afford the flight." "I managed," I said, taking a sip. "Throughout the night," I observed. I listened, and because of my little spreadsheet job, I noticed things that my star-struck parents completely missed. I noticed the way Preston snapped at the waitstaff. I noticed how he grabbed Stella's arm a little too tightly when she laughed too loudly, and more importantly, thanks to a few discreet background checks I'd run through my firm's network out of pure curiosity, I knew a secret about the illustrious Caldwell family. Their logistics empire was bleeding cash. Preston's father had made terrible investments, and Preston himself was an unemployed playboy living entirely off a rapidly dwindling trust fund. They weren't wealthy, they were highly leveraged and drowning in debt. Stella wasn't marrying into a fortune, she was marrying onto the Titanic. But I didn't say a word. I smiled. I ate the hors d'oeuvres. I let my father give a booming speech about how Stella was the crown jewel of the Harrison family. As the night wound down, Stella pulled me aside into one of the estate's luxurious bathrooms. The facade cracked, just for a second. "So," she said, touching up her lipstick, "are you seeing anyone, or are you still just working all the time?" "Just working?" I replied. She sighed, a sound of profound, condescending pity. "You know, Christina, you really need to put yourself out there. Work isn't everything. Look at me. I have everything I've ever wanted. I just don't want you to end up alone and bitter in some tiny New York apartment." I looked at my sister. I looked at the dark circles she was trying to hide under expensive concealer, and the nervous twitch in her hand when she mentioned Preston's name. "Don't worry about me, Stella," I said, turning to leave. "I'm exactly where I want to be." Not much. I walked out into the cool night air, pulled out my phone and authorized the wire transfer to purchase the commercial property that housed my father's mid-sized retail business. He didn't own the building. He leased it. And as of 9 a.m. Monday morning, his lease would belong to a shadowy LLC registered in Delaware. An LLC owned entirely by me. The game hadn't just begun. I was already 10 moves ahead, and they didn't even know we were playing. 3 years passed, 3 years of relentless, agonizingly precise execution. I left Sterling and Hayes and took 2 of their best quantitative analysts with me to start my own boutique private equity firm, Cobalt Group. We specialized in distressed asset acquisitions, buying up failing businesses, gutting the rot, and restructuring them for massive profit. By my 27th birthday, I wasn't just wealthy. I had the kind of generational wealth that makes people nervous. I lived in a sprawling, glass-walled penthouse overlooking Central Park, wore custom-tailored Tom Ford suits, and commanded a boardroom with a single look. But to my family in Chicago, I was still just Christina, the introverted spreadsheet girl scraping by in a high-rent city. Stella's life, meanwhile, had hit the inevitable brick wall I saw coming at her engagement party. The Caldwell logistics empire didn't just bleed out, it hemorrhaged. A combination of brutal supply chain disruptions, gross mismanagement, and Preston's rampant gambling addiction drove the company straight into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The fallout was spectacular, a slow-motion car crash documented entirely through Stella's increasingly desperate social media presence. The yachts were replaced by generic hotel pools. The designer bags were quietly sold on luxury consignment sites. Preston, stripped of his trust fund and his pride, turned mean. He wasn't the charming pastel-wearing heir anymore. He was an angry, unemployed man taking out his humiliation on his wife. Then the dominoes truly began to fall. My father's business, Haddison Home and Hardware, a mid-sized chain of boutique home improvement stores, relied heavily on a massive central distribution warehouse. For 15 years, he had enjoyed a severely under-market lease agreement negotiated by his old friend, the previous building owner. When that lease came up for renewal, my father received a crisp legal notice from his new landlord, a Delaware-based entity called Obsidian Holdings, LLC. The rent wasn't just increasing, it was being adjusted to current market rates, an immediate 180% hike. Furthermore, the new lease required a massive cash deposit up front. I sat at my mahogany desk in Manhattan, sipping black coffee, and watched the panic unfold from 1,000 miles away. My mother called me on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. It was the first time she'd called me first in over a year. "Christina, sweetheart," she began, her voice trembling, stripped of its usual condescending lilt. "We're in a bit of a crisis. Your father's landlord is doubling his rent. It's extortion. The business. Christina, if he can't pay the deposit by the end of the month, they're evicting the inventory. He'll be ruined." "That sounds stressful, Mom," I said smoothly, leaning back in my leather chair. "Have you asked Stella and Preston for help? Surely the Caldwells have some liquidity." A sharp sob echoed through the receiver. "Things are very bad with Stella. Preston is broke, Christina. The bank is foreclosing on their house in Highland Park. Stella is packing her things to move back into her old bedroom here. We have nothing left to give her, and she has nowhere else to go." The golden child was returning to the nest, stripped of her feathers. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, my voice betraying absolutely no emotion. "Christina, I hate to ask this," my mother whispered, the shame palpable, "but your father needs a $50,000 loan, just to cover the deposit and buy him time to negotiate. You've been working so hard in New York. Do you have anything saved? We'll pay you back with interest, I swear." I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Manhattan skyline. I had $50,000 sitting in a low-yield checking account just for daily incidentals. It was pocket change. "Mom," I said, my tone shifting from obedient daughter to corporate shark. "Don't wire anything. Tell Dad to fly to New York on Thursday. Have Stella come with him. She could probably use a distraction from the foreclosure. I'll see what I can do to help organize his finances." "Oh, Christina, thank you. We'll be there." "Thank you." She hung up, weeping with relief. She thought she was coming to my cramped apartment to take my hard-earned life savings. She had no idea she was walking into the lion's den. Thursday morning, the Manhattan sky was a brilliant, unforgiving blue. I arranged for a black car to pick my father and Stella up from LaGuardia Airport. When the driver dropped them off at the base of the towering glass and steel skyscraper in the financial district, I received a text from my father. "We're at the address, Christina. This is a massive corporate building. Are we meeting you at a coffee shop near here?" "Take the elevator to the 54th floor," I replied. Tell reception you're here to see the CEO. I waited in my corner office. The double mahogany doors opened and my assistant Sarah led them in. I will never, for the rest of my life, forget the look on their faces. My father, looking 10 years older with deep bags under his eyes, froze in the doorway. Stella, wearing a faded tracksuit and clutching a worn leather tote, stared open-mouthed at the sheer scale of the room. The original modern art on the walls. Panoramic view of the city. And me sitting behind a desk the size of a dining table wearing a crisp white blazer and a Cartier watch that cost more than my father's car. Christina? My father choked out, stepping onto the plush carpet as if he expected a trap door to open. Whose office is this? Are you house-sitting for your boss? I stood up, buttoned my blazer and walked around the desk. Hello, Dad. Stella. Please, sit. They sank into the leather guest chairs, completely bewildered. This is my office, Dad, I stated calmly, taking the seat opposite them. I am the founder and CEO of Cobalt Group. We manage roughly $2 billion in assets. Stella let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. Stop joking, Christina. Seriously. Mum said you were going to help Dad figure out his spreadsheet for the bank. I don't need to look at his spreadsheet, Stella, I said, turning my gaze to her. It was cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of sisterly warmth. I already know exactly what his margins are. I know that Harrison Home & Hardware runs at a 4% net profit, and I know that a 180% rent increase will bankrupt him in less than 6 months. My father went pale. How could you possibly know my margins? That's private financial data. I leaned forward, folding my hands on my lap. Because Dad, Obsidian Holdings, LLC, the company that bought your building and is raising your rent, is a subsidiary of Cobalt Group. I own it. I am your landlord. The swaggering and truly know the first thing she truly noticed. You, my father whispered, the blood draining from his face. You bought the building. You're the one doing this to me. I didn't do anything to you, I corrected smoothly. I made a strategic real estate acquisition. Your previous landlord was drastically undervaluing the property. I simply adjusted the asset to fair market value. It's strictly business. Business. Stella shrieked, suddenly finding her voice. She jumped up, her face twisting into an ugly, familiar mask of entitlement. You're ruining our family over business. Have you lost your mind? Dad is losing everything. My life is falling apart, and you're sitting up here in your ivory tower playing games. I looked at my sister. For the first time in 27 years, I didn't see the beautiful, untouchable golden child. I saw a terrified, deeply unhappy woman who had never worked a day in her life and was suddenly facing the consequences of her own vanity. Your life fell apart, Stella, because you married a bankrupt fraud for his status, I said, my voice dangerously low. You wanted the shiny toy. You always wanted the shiny toy. Remember Noah Gallagher? Remember the red BMW? You took, and Mum and Dad applauded you for it. They bankrupted their own future to fund your delusions. I turned to my father, who was staring at his hands, trembling. You didn't invest in me, Dad, I said quietly. You told me Penn was too expensive. You told me I was a burden. You let me eat instant noodles and work 35 hours a week while taking a full Ivy League course load, all while you bought Stella designer dresses for fraternity formals. Christina, I'm sorry, he rasped, tears finally spilling over his eyelids. We were foolish. We thought you were so strong, so independent. We thought Stella needed us more. Stella needed boundaries. I needed parents, I corrected. But I made my peace with that a long time ago. I learned how to survive without you. And more importantly, I learned how to win. I walked back to my desk and picked up a thick legal folder, tossing it onto the coffee table in front of them. What is this? My father asked, afraid to touch it. That, I said, is a new lease agreement. It guarantees your current rent rate for the next 10 years, with no cash deposit required. He looked up, a desperate, pathetic spark of hope in his eyes. You're letting me keep the warehouse? Under one condition, I replied, crossing my arms. I require a 51% equity stake in Harrison Home & Hardware. I become majority owner. You work for me now. If you refuse, the eviction notice stands and the sheriffs will lock the doors on Monday. My father stared at the contract. He knew he was beaten. He had no leverage, no capital, and no other options. Slowly, with a shaking hand, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a pen, and signed the document. And as for you, I said, turning my gaze back to Stella, who was sobbing quietly into her hands. I purchased the bundled debt from Coldwell Logistics during the liquidation proceedings. Included in that package was the mortgage on your Highland Park house. Stella's head snapped up, mascara running down her cheeks. You own my house? Bob. I own the bank's right to foreclose on your house, I corrected, which I am fully executing. You have 30 days to vacate the property. I suggest you start looking for a job. I hear the local coffee shop is hiring baristas. It builds character. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Sarah, please escort my guests to the elevators. They stood up, broken, stripped of their illusions, and utterly defeated. As they walked out the mahogany doors, my father turned back one last time, looking at me not as his daughter, but as a stranger he deeply feared. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply sat down, opened my laptop, and went back to work. People think revenge is screaming and crying, but as I watched my stock portfolio tick upward in the quiet hum of my penthouse office, I knew the truth. True revenge is peace. True revenge is power. True revenge is winning so absolutely that your enemies realize they were never even playing in the same league. If Christina's ruthless journey to the top gave you chills, you know what to do. Hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that the best revenge is massive success. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below. Would you have saved the family business or let them fall? Turn on notifications so you never miss our next dramatic story.